time to review the movie that started the whole 80s franchise trend.
One, two, three!
Hey everyone, it's Don G. Corleone here, and I'm here with episode about 22 of Halloween Horror Movie Season 3, and this episode is going to be for a film that kicked off the 1960s decade, released in the year 1960, and was directed by legendary filmmaker himself, Alfred Hitchcock. And this was for one of the most notorious movies, and the film that started off the slasher franchise trend before Halloween really revolutionized it. And that film is none other than 1960's Psycho, directed by Alfred Hitchcock. What's the plot of this? Well, Phoenix office worker Marion Crane is fed up with the way life has treated her. She has to meet her lover Sam in lunch breaks, and they cannot get married because Sam has to give most of his money away in alimony. One Friday, Marion is trusted to bank $40,000 by her employer. Seeing the opportunity to take the money and start a new life, Marion leaves town and heads towards Sam's California store. Tired after the long drive and caught in a storm, she gets off the main highway and pulls into the Bates Motel. The motel is managed by a quiet young man called Norman who seems to be dominated by his mother. Yeah, so that's the plot of this movie. Well, Psycho is actually based off Robert Bloch's 1959 novel of the same name, loosely inspired by the case of convicted Wisconsin murderer and grave robber Ed Gein. Both Gein, who lived only 40 miles from Bloch, and his stories protagonist Norman Bates were solitary murderers in isolated rural locations. Each has deceased, domineering mothers, had sealed off a room in their home as a shrine to them, and dressed in women's clothes. Gein was apprehended after killing only twice. The Psycho set on the Universal Studios lot, featuring a Ford Custom 300 similar to that driven by Janet Leigh in the film, is now part of the studio tour at the Universal Studios Hollywood theme park. Peggy Robertson, Hitchcock's longtime assistant, read Anthony Bourdain's positive review of the novel in his Criminals at Large column in the New York Times and decided to show the book to her employer. However, studio readers at Paramount Pictures had already rejected its premise for a film. Hitchcock acquired rights to the novel for $9,500 and reportedly ordered Robertson to buy all copies to preserve the novel surprises. Hitchcock, who had come to face genre competitors whose works were critically compared to his own, was seeking new material to recover from two aborted projects with Paramount, Flamingo Feather and No Bail for the Judge. He disliked Starz' salary demands and trusted only a few people to choose prospective material, including Robertson. And Paramount executives balked at Hitchcock's proposal and refused to provide his unusual budget. In response, Hitchcock offered to film Psycho quickly and cheaply in black and while using Alfred Hitchcock Presents television series crew. Paramount executives rejected this cost-conscious approach, claiming their sound stages were booked, but the industry was in a slump, and Hitchcock countered that he personally would finance the project and film it at Universal International using his family productions crew if Paramount would distribute. In lieu of his usual $250,000 director's fee, he proposed a 60% stake in the film. Negative. This combined offer was accepted, and Hitchcock went ahead in spite of naysaying from producer Herbert Coleman and Shameless Productions executive Joan Harrison. So anyway, upon release, after the movie was shot and completed, on September 8th, 1960, the film was initially considered controversial and received mixed reviews, but audience interest in outstanding box office returns prompted a major critical reevaluation. And the movie's now critically acclaimed. Psycho was even nominated for 4 Academy Awards, including Best Supporting Actress for Leigh and Best Director for Hitchcock. And we all know, in today's world, Psycho is now considered one of Alfred Hitchcock's best movies and is arguably his most famous work. It has been praised as a major work of cinematic art by international film critics and scholars due to its slick direction, tense atmosphere, and impressive camera work. a memorable score, and iconic performances, and often ranked among the greatest films of all time. It set a new level of acceptability for violence, deviant behavior, and sexuality in American films, and is widely considered to be one of the earliest examples of the slasher film genre. It even revolutionized the slasher genre until Halloween really revolutionized it when that film came out in 1978. And after Hitchcock's sad death in 1980, Universal Pictures would go on to produce some follow-ups, which were 3 sequels, which were 2, 3, and 4. A shot-for-shot remake that sucked ass, a made-for-television spin-off, and a television series set in the 2010s. Then in 1992, Library of Congress deemed the film culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant and selected it for preservation in the United States National Film Registry. As for my reaction, well, I'm going to say this. Psycho is easily among the greatest horror films of all time and the best horror film of the 60s. So much has been written about the film that all I can do is add my own voice of approval and say that I consider it to be a masterpiece, and add a few things often overlooked or not commented on. That adds so much to the movie's cumulative power. It's often the little things that make a film work. This is pretty much the rare example of a much ballyhooed film that is truly deserving of all the hype surrounding it. It would have been nice to have experienced the film without any knowledge of the plot twists. Well, unfortunately for most viewers, the big surprises are not possible since so many of the scenes are part of our popular culture. There were, however, so many unexpected surprises here. Like, the opening scene with Janet Leigh and John Gavin in the hotel room was amazing and very, very real. Until, even though it's become kind of a cliche today in so many other films, and Hitchcock and Janet Leigh did a brilliant film of pulling us into Marion Crane's story, that of a woman in love with a divorced man who might as well be married, considering his heavy financial obligations that leave him unable to marry in a practical sense, even though he can be in a legal sense. He doesn't even have a proper home, just a room in the back of the store he owns. Marion is then seemingly set up as the center of the movie as she thinks she has found a solution to her problems. A felonious, illegal one anyways. Then the focus is skillfully shifted to the Norman Bates character as a protagonist, victimized by his insane mother, or so it seems, and then the focus is shifted once again to Marion's sister's church. And Norman Bates is one of the most famous fictional names in film history, thanks to this film and the great work portraying him by Anthony Perkins. Norman is pretty much a nutcase, as it turns out, and the more you know all about him, the more fun it is to study Perkins and his character Norman in subsequent viewings. He really has the guy down pat. However, it isn't just Perkins' film. The supporting is just fine with Leigh, whose figure is still awesome no matter how many times you still see the film. Martin Balsam as a private detective, Vera Miles and John Gavin, and just everyone contributes to this film. The sound effects in here don't even hurt. Like when Balsam is attacked, the accompanying frightening music never fails to bring chills down my spine. The music literally screams at you. The film as a whole is even spectacular, but there's some sections I like to break it down into. First, I was very surprised and impressed with the actors that played Mary Crane and Norman Bates, like I've already said. Janet Leigh isn't given too much exposure in the film since she's pretty much killed off in about the middle of it. I thought that she did a good, but not really too much of a great job. On the other hand, Anthony Perkins blew me away. Both Norman and Anthony are very interesting. Norman's life that is set up and shown to us is so well depicted that I could never imagine anyone else playing the part. All the characters using Arbogast, Lil, and Sam are also very well created. And now you're probably wondering about the shower scene. The very, very iconic scene. You know that scene with that score? Even though the ever so famous shower scene is said to be one of the most chilling death scenes in history, I find the scene to be a little bit overhyped. A little bit. It's just kind of one nitpick I have with it. I love it as much as the next person, don't get me wrong, but it's not all that scary. But who said it was supposed to be scary? Not really anybody. I mean, yeah, it did frighten some people out of the showers, but it's really not that frightening of a scene. But the majority of the Psycho audience gathers it to be very frightening, and I do still think it is one of the greatest, most shocking scenes in horror movies ever. The setting is very well set up as well. The Bates Motel house is so cleverly created that it brings a special atmosphere to the audience, and that's something about it that you can't forget. And Psycho has easily one of the best scripts you'll ever find in a movie too. If there's one nitpick I have with the film, The movie's only shortcoming, or the one bad quality you can say, is that one of the characters seems to have little motivation in the first act of the movie, but as the story progresses, you realize that Hitchcock, in a stroke of genius, has done this on purpose, because there's another character whose motivations are even more important. Vitally important. So important that you totally forget about anything else. And I'm glad I avoided any conversation regarding the plot of this movie as well. And I was glad to have officially seen this as one of the first horror movies I watched. This movie arguably has the best mid-plot point and cinematic twist in thriller history, and certainly the best directed ending. The last few shots are so frightening and chilling and leave a lingering horror in the viewer's mind. And just as good as the writing is Hitchcock's direction, which is so outstanding that it defies explanation. Suffice to say that this movie is probably the best directional effort by film history's best director too. And it's pretty much the film that really got me introduced to Alfred Hitchcock. Another film that got me pretty good film that got me introduced to Alfred Hitchcock was The Birds, which he did 3 years after this movie. Yeah. Yeah, and apparently it was explained by even Janet Leigh too that Hitchcock's genius was in his ability to, 1, frighten without gore, and 2, leave his indelible mark on the movie without overshadowing his actors. Psycho is clearly its own phenomenon, despite all the big-name talent involved. Another pros it has are a really good plot, a well-constructed screenplay, and beautifully black and white cinematography that is perfect in conveying the creepy mood. And the ending did surprise me. The acting, though, is explanatory, with Janet Leigh giving one of the best deserved performances ever in a Hitchcock film, and Anthony Perkins giving the best performance ever. He pretty much stole the film as Norman Bates. He didn't just play creepy, like he was creepy. His face, his voice, and his mannerisms. And Vera Miles also gives a pretty stellar performance too. But in short, this movie is just one of the most... with Anthony Perkins, he has one of the most chilling performances of all time. In the end, Psycho is a film that defined the slasher genre and made it all mainstream, while Halloween would further make it a permanent thing several years later. I would highly recommend this movie to just about anybody who is a horror buff. Any horror buff that has not seen this is really out of their minds and really needs to watch this movie already. Like, come on. Anyways, that's pretty much it for my review of 1960's Psycho. And if you're wondering how I'm going to rank 1960's Psycho, here's how I'm going to rank this movie. So overall, if you were a fan of Hitchcock and horror, then I would easily watch this film and then buy this film on Blu-ray or DVD for your collection for sure. And if you're wondering how I'm going to rank Psycho 1960, I'm going to give Psycho 1960 an obvious 10 out of 10. There we go. That wraps up my review for 1960's Psycho. And you're probably wondering, what's going to be the next episode of this series? Well, the next episode, as we're approaching the final 3 episodes, is going to be for a 4th installment of a franchise, and this was not a theatrically released one. This was one that was badly made for TV, and it was garbage, even worse than its previous installment that I also reviewed. And it's part of that Another Satanic Kid franchise that I've already reviewed the other 2 sequels for. It's Home for the Awakening. Fuck. That's next. But until then, that'll be it for this episode. Thank y'all for watching. And if you like this, want to see more, then don't forget to like and subscribe to Don G. Corleone.